I can't believe we've hit 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube, so I asked you some questions and we're going to go through those now and answer them. First up, Ross Parker 1877 has a great question. When did you realise it was the books themselves rather than what they contained that they loved? And this gets to really the heart of what I do and what I try to speak about on this channel, that books are not just vessels for text to be conveyed to a reader. They are these material objects in their own right, with their own histories and things that happen to them both in their production and also after they've been printed and bound and released into the world. And sometimes those things that happen to them after are far more interesting than what they contain themselves. The first time I realised this, I must have been about 10 years old, and I've told this story in a short before, but the author Caroline Lawrence, who wrote the Roman Mysteries, came to my school, and I eagerly brought in a big pile of books for her to sign for me. And one of those books was a hardback called The Enemies of Jupiter, and she looked at it with a smile, and Julie inscribed it for me, you can see there, to Thomas, because I insisted on being called Thomas when I was a child. I was never Ars Longa Caroline Lawrence. But then she did something that was genuinely amazing. She said this was a first edition, and knowing what I know now, I can turn over the page and see that this is indeed a first edition. But that because it was a first edition, there was a problem in it, and she wanted to correct it for me. So she turned very, very quickly to page 166 and saw an error there, a printer's error. And you can see she's corrected this here by hand with a little exclamation mark of apology. And suddenly I had this object that was not a storybook. Previously, and what most people experience going through school was that, books are just things you read and they tell you stories and that's what you get out of them. But now I had this object that was different, that was worth more than its weight in gold, that was prized beyond rubies, all because of a little mistake in there that was completely incidental and unrelated to the text of the book itself. So that was my first realization of that phenomenon of the book being an object and not just a vessel for the text. That guy Xander asks, rather helpfully, what got you started in all of this? I'm quite curious. So, essentially that's, what happened? How did I become someone who deals in rare books for a living? And it wasn't a career that I necessarily thought I would end up with. I studied not English at university, but international relations. I studied in particular the Middle East and Iraq, and looked at cultural heritage sites in Iraq over the sort of ISIS occupation and what happened to them during that. And it was, to be honest with you, it was a really quite harrowing thing to research. I got these satellite scans of these archaeological sites, on a kind of weekly basis, and, seeing what was still there and what wasn't. It was quite depressing, to be honest, as a research subject. But anyway, that's what I was doing at university. But more importantly, while I was at university, I started working in a bookshop. That bookshop was called Topping and Company, and I utterly fell in love with the art of bookselling. Robert Topping, who ran Topping Company, was a wonderful, wonderful man to learn from. And you might have seen his bookshops in either St Andrews, where I was at university, or places like Edinburgh and Bath and Ely. They are sort of little Athenses of the mind. They're really quite extraordinary. But I fell in love with bookselling then, and while I was at university as well, I started using things like the Special Collections Library at St Andrews, where you could go and order these rare and old books that I needed for my studies and my research, and sometimes just for my personal interest. And you got to look through them, and it was the most wonderful, remarkable, and tactile thing. The texts that you study at university now are, for the most part, they're PDFs. They're chapters of a book that you were assigned. So to actually go in and look at the original copies of those books is a completely different experience to just experiencing the textual form of a work. So that's what turned my head, I suppose, towards bookselling. I still, after university, thought I wanted to be an academic, so I moved down to London and started studying at SOAS and sort of going off on that path. But there were two problems with that. One, I was studying the Middle East and still am to this day, really not a very talented linguist, so that would have probably stunted my career progression quite a lot. But also I yearned to get back into bookselling. So as many of you know, I saw a job advertised at a place called Yonkers Rare Books in Henley, and I worked there for 7 years before setting up my own business dealing in rare books earlier this year. Next question, you have unlimited money. What single book or series would you acquire? This is one of the things about book collecting, is that it's not really about money. You could have all the money in the world but still not be able to find truly great or rare material because you're not given the opportunity to acquire it. The difficult thing really is not affording these things or paying for these things, but finding them. That's what's truly, truly difficult. If something amazing comes up, I might not have the cash to buy it myself, but certainly I can recommend it to customers of mine and try and acquire it for them, on their behalf. But what one doesn't really need in the business is more money, more cash on hand, sitting there to go and buy something amazing. It's really the ability to find it and to have the opportunity to lay your hands on it and seek it out that's truly important. Ketho Chusi asks, what's the rarest book that you have? That's a good question. And if I look behind me, I think I know which one I'm going to pick for this and show you. It's a tiny little book down here, but it's absolutely beautiful. Let me sit down and show it to you. You can see on the cover here, it's a beautiful red Morocco. Morocco is a type of leather binding with lovely gilt decoration to the covers, repeated all the way around. As you can see on the front, it says The Battle of Hastings, FC Heaven. FC Heaven's the author. And the first thing you notice when you look inside this book are these beautiful silk brocade end papers, and we have a book plate here, and we'll come back to that in a second. But the book itself is an account of the Battle of Hastings in verse. You can see that on the title page here. Printed in Hull in 1885. You can see the printer was A. Brown and Sons. And actually, if you look at the little bookseller's ticket here, you can see that's A. Brown and Sons as well, I hope. And it's, as you can see, we'll go to the start of the poem. It's a verse account of the Battle of Hastings in a sort of Victorian doggerel style, similar to, is it William McGonagall, who writes poems in that rather tough style to get through. But there we are, it's very of its time. But the wonderful thing about this book is, number one, it is terribly, terribly rare. It is printed in Hull, and the University of Hull is the only library in the world that has a copy of this book. No library in America has a copy of this book. The British Library, which should have a copy of every single book printed in this country, doesn't have a copy of it. There's only one other, so this is very, very rare. And it's also a very important copy of this book, because if we look to the dedication page of the book, which is where you'll find that, sometimes it says, to my mother or to my wife or to my dear friend so-and-so. This is dedicated to Catherine Lucy Wilhelmina, the Duchess of Cleveland, which is an incredibly appropriate person for this book to be dedicated to, because the Duchess of Cleveland owned Battle Abbey, the abbey that was built on the site of the Battle of Hastings by, or at least started by, William the Conqueror. And she was incredibly interested in the history of the site and published a spurious edition of the Battle Abbey roll. So really someone who's tied up with the story of Hastings. And if we go back to those beautiful silk end papers, you can see that this book, this copy, is her copy. It's from the library of the Duchess of Cleveland. So this is what we would call the dedication copy of a book, which is very special on its own. The dedication copy of any book is about, usually the best copy of that book you can find. But this also happens to be exceedingly rare and exceedingly beautiful in this lovely publisher's presentation binding. So this rather wonderful little thing is the rarest book I have at the moment. J. Cole asks, what's the worst part of your job? I love hearing all the great things, but often I find it's what people hate about their job that reveals the most interesting and weird little insights. That's a very good question, and a very difficult question, because as I'm sure you know, Jay, and I'm sure people watching this know, I love what I do. I wouldn't change it for the world. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have its drawbacks. It's a really wonderful and fulfilling thing to make something you love, to make a hobby of yours, which for me was book collecting before I started on this career, your job. But the problem with having your hobby as your work is that you're always working, because outside of work, anyone else would do their hobbies, and I just do more work. So it's not very good for my work-life balance. I'm also, of course, in the early days of starting and trying to build a business, and that's incredibly time consuming. And I know it's very tough on my family. I've got a wife and a young daughter, and I spend as much time with them as I possibly can, but I know in truth it's not enough. So it's difficult doing this, but I love it, and I know that long term it's going to work out, and hopefully we together can build something amazing out of it. But yeah, the worst part of it is the time, and I love spending all that time doing it, but there are second order effects. Corey Mack asks, how much of your collection would you give up to get a Gutenberg Bible? I mean, a Gutenberg Bible is a very, very tempting book. I mean, it's an extraordinarily valuable book. For those of you who don't know, the Gutenberg Bible was the first substantial book printed with metal movable type in the West, printed by Johannes Gutenberg in Mainz in the 1450s. And it is not just the first book thus printed in Europe, it is also, without question, one of the most beautiful. There's a wonderful line by Rosenbach that I won't try and quote. A.S.W. Rosenbach, who was a famous book dealer, where he's talking about the chance of it being both the first book and the most beautiful one. It's really a remarkable object. But the truth is, what would I give up? Well, I could sell everything I own, everything I've ever sold, and everything I will ever sell, and that probably wouldn't total up to the value of a Gutenberg Bible. I mean, I think without question, if one were to come on the market today or in the near future, you're talking about a book that is, in the region of $50 to $100 million. So extraordinarily valuable. To play a hand in the transaction of one of them would be a really marvelous thing and a real thrill. But I wouldn't give up everything I have to do so. Fluffy Monkey M asks, when you acquire a new book, what is your first step? Do you catalogue it or look it over? This is a really good question, because there is a stage that happens before one catalogues a book. Cataloguing a book is writing the physical description. I don't actually handwrite it, of course, I type it on my computer. But that's the formal physical description, and when you buy a book from me, it comes with that printed physical description of the book, and that acts as its guarantee. That's what a catalogue description is. But before we do that, we have to do something very, very important called collation. And collation is, like the questioner asks or says, is the process of checking it over. So we check every single page of every single book, and we make sure that it's all as it should be. And if it's not as it should be, we need to work out why that is. And once we've gone through all of that, we are left with what is known as a collation formula. This is basically the sort of scientific way of describing exactly how that book has been printed and folded and bound. So a very simple collation formula might look like something like A to Z8, which would mean there are a succession of consequential gatherings lettered A to Z, each of those gatherings containing 8 leaves, and that is the composition of the book. And when you look through an old book, you will see those signatures: A1, A2, A3, A4, blah, 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 B1, B2, B3, B4, and so on as you go through the book. So you're checking those, but also when you're collating the book, you're looking out for anything else that you might come across that make that book interesting and add to its story. That's why it's so important to check these things page by page so that I can build a full picture of what this object is and its history, and then convey that to you both in a sort of very scientific way, but also in a sort of more narrative structure through the catalogue description. The Weeb channel asks, how hard is it to buy books to sell versus books for your personal collection? I try and make this very, very easy on myself. I sell almost everything that I buy, or I try to sell it. I buy books to sell them. That's the business. It's not quite as straightforward as that, of course, because I buy books to collate them and catalogue them and place them in their proper historical context and then find new homes for them. But the shorthand for that is, I buy them to sell them. I do have a private collection of books. They're on the bookcase that you see to my right here. And they're all books about the town of St Andrews, ranging from some early printed books to modern guidebooks and everything in between, and including little things like little objets d'art. I've got some wax seals. I picked up this the other day in a shop just because it was quite pretty. This is a little Morschlimware box with St Andrews Cathedral on the lid of it, and you can see that this one is from 1878. So that was a fun thing I found. I was in an antique shop looking for books and ended up finding this, alongside some books, to be fair. So I find it very easy to accommodate the sort of collecting and the dealing by having a very, very niche, very well-defined private book collection. G. Menesdia says, do you only deal with books in English, or have you found some rarity in other languages? Lots of what I deal in is in English, but I also have books in other languages behind me. We've got things like this edition of Procopius is printed in both Greek and Latin. This work, Gilles Menage's Menagiana, is in French. And this is a wonderful little manuscript that I picked up the other day. You can see the title on the spine, Histoire Secrète. And this is a beautiful 17th century manuscript in French. So lots of what I deal in is in English. Lots of the authors that I deal in are English authors, but I also deal in European books and books in other languages. I have a lot of Arabic material come through, but it sells quite quickly, so I don't have any of that to show you today. CRZ Noet ML asks, if you could get your hands on non-English and non-European old rare books, what would you get and why? Well, like I touched on then, I deal in quite a lot of Arabic material. From my academic background that I mentioned earlier, I'm very interested in the Middle East. But something that I don't get a lot of that would be interesting to see or handle, but I don't deal in it because I don't understand it, is Chinese material. China is the birthplace of print, both in woodblock and in movable type. And to have or handle something from that birthplace of printing, that cradle of duplication, would be incredibly special. But I just don't get involved in that. I mean, early stuff is, of course, very old and very rare because they were printing long before Europeans were. But to see or handle and understand better some of that material would be really wonderful. Becca McCusack asks, what tips do you have for maintaining a library, like a personal library? Any tips on how to prune, organise, store or add to a home library? Well, there's three main things really that you want to think about when you're thinking about storing and housing a book collection, having your home library like I do here. And really those three things are storage, handling and environment. So I'll just run through them quickly in case this is helpful to you. So storing rare books is quite easy. good sturdy shelves, stack them not too tightly, not too loosely. You don't want gaps where books can fall over, but as you can see behind me, that's perfectly good for rare books. You can see on the shelf below perhaps some sort of these sort of magazine-y type things down there do sometimes fall over, but they're reference work, so I don't mind that. In terms of handling books, they're perfectly safe to handle. You don't need to wear gloves, as I'm sure you all know, but clean, dry hands. Don't open them too wide, because you don't want to put undue stress on the binding. And if you can always hold and support the book as you're looking through it, then you're going to make sure that there's no, as I say, undue stress being put on that book. And environment, there's some very, very simple ground rules for the environment that your books are in. You want them to be out of direct sunlight. So I have these wonderful in my library, wonderful, almost floor-to-ceiling Victorian windows that are covered by a blind to protect the books. But there's other things. So temperature and humidity are the other things to keep an eye on. The rough guide is that if you're comfortable in that room for a number of hours, then it's probably an okay environment. But if you measure these things or want to measure these things, then the ideal room temperature is between 16 and 19 degrees Celsius, which is 60 to 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you measure relative humidity, particularly if you're in a very dry or humid climate, you might do this somewhere between 45 to 60 relative humidity. And the important thing there really is that's quite a wide bracket, but the constancy of that humidity is quite important, just as much as the level is. So they're the sort of storage, handling and environment tips for rare books. Sebastian V asks, should I somehow concentrate my collection on a particular subject, or does it make sense to collect whatever catches my eye? Is the reason I like books with beautiful engravings and binding considered a priority and focus for a collection? Well, look, it's your collection of books and it will become whatever you want it to be, and it will reflect you and the way you collect. But the advice that I would give, that by all means put your own personality into it, is that we should be buying books deliberately. Even if you have no deliberate focus or specific focus, you should be making deliberate decisions. And if you do have a deliberate focus, still avoid making undeliberate purchases. So what do I mean by this? Deliberate purchases mean that everything you're buying is a considered and thought through decision. It's not just, why am I buying this book, but why am I buying this edition of this book? Why am I buying this issue of this edition of this book? And most importantly, why am I buying this copy of this issue of this edition of this book? Printed books are multiples, and many, many books survive in multiple copies. So you have a decision to make. Do I want this copy, or do I want that copy, or another copy that might exist somewhere out there? And they're important decisions to make, because those decisions are going to shape how your collection looks, the history of it, and the sort of things that you're going to be looking for. And a very fair answer to the question, why this copy, could simply be because I like it, but it could also be because of its condition, because of its binding, because of its provenance and ownership history, because of annotations that are in it, because of illustrations, because of any number of these wonderful variables that make book collecting such an amazing and diverting hobby. Mombaloo asks, how is it best to get into book collecting communities that are in the UK, and what events/festivals are there that people should look out for? Well, I mean, one thing that I'm trying to do is build a community on here, and I hope you guys are coming along for the ride with that, because that's really important to me. But in terms of in-person real life events, visit book fairs. I mean, visit book shops if you have any near you, but also visit book fairs. In the UK, there are two organisations, main organisations that run book fairs, the PBFA and the ABA, and I'll put their details in the description below. But if you live overseas, then in the US, you've got the ABAA and a whole number of other international organisations or national organisations that arrange book fairs. And I'll put the link below for iLab, the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers, for their website. And there you can see all the book fairs across the world that they are affiliated with. Book fairs are amazing events where booksellers from all over the country or all over the world sometimes gather for a day or a weekend or a week and share their books with you. They're there, of course, to offer them for sale and to meet new customers. But if you want to go and see an amazing diversity of books and get your hands on books and get excited by them and really get into book collecting, I'm a great evangelist for book fairs. Annie says, I want to start collecting books, but I don't know how. I'm interested in special and rare editions of classics, specifically Dostoevsky, that won't break the bank, but I don't know where to look. This is a great question because I know a lot of people can get put off book collecting, especially when they're interested in famous authors like Dostoevsky and they see the prices for first editions in the thousands or tens of thousands and get scared off. And this is the truth. If you want to collect Dostoevsky first editions, in the original Russian, that's going to cost you a lot of money. So it's fine to not collect that, but to collect other Dostoevsky editions, because this is an author that has been published all over the world, whose work has travelled an incredibly long way in a diverse range of formats. So you can collect more far-flung translations of his work. You can collect interestingly produced series or sets of his work. You can collect beautifully illustrated copies of his work. You can collect, runs of paperback editions of his novels. You can collect a whole range of different copies of the same novel. You could have a collection devoted to as many different copies of Crime and Punishment as you can possibly find. And each of those books individually might not be incredibly interesting, but when you've got 100 of them or 200 of them, suddenly as a collective, as a group, as a collection, they're telling a really amazing story. Sebastian Vitek asks, where can I find an original 1937 first edition of The Hobbit for a reasonable price, not over $500? Unfortunately, for $500, the only place you can find one is in the past. There's no way of buying a 1937 first edition of The Hobbit for $500 now. There's no real way of buying one for, or euros or pounds or whatever currency you're in. 500 is not going to cut it. 5,000 isn't going to cut it either, I'm afraid. I think the cheapest copy currently on the market is £15,000, and then if you want one with a dust jacket, a copy with a very poor dust jacket, not in great condition at all, sold this week for 31 and a bit thousand pounds. So that's the level for a first edition of The Hobbit. But if your budget is £500, you can still buy really interesting, beautifully produced, bibliographically important editions of The Hobbit. You just can't buy a first edition. Sapu Nardoy asks, if you knew you had a few days left, what book would you invest your time reading? To be honest with you, this is going to be a very short answer. If I had a few days left, I probably wouldn't spend any time reading. I'd spend it with people, because you might not believe this, but although I'm someone who's dedicated his life to books and in doing so isolated himself from people to a certain extent, people are still more important than books are. Your Tired Wizard asks, my question is, what's one book that's so ancient that has tons of wisdom in it that's still relevant to this day for you? Well, I think one of the most remarkable books of the 17th century is a book called The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. It was published in 1621, but revised in subsequent editions until Burton's death in 1640. And it's a book about melancholy, about melancholia, about what we nowadays would call depression. It's a book about what it is and what to do about it. And it's profoundly modern and incredibly all-encompassing. There's this great bit at the start where he says, let me try and find it. And from these melancholy dispositions, no man living is free, no stoic, none so wise, none so happy, none so patient, so generous, so godly, so divine, that can vindicate himself, so well composed, but more or less, sometime or other, he feels the smart of it. Melancholy in this sense is the character of mortality, which is incredibly profound and close to our modern understanding of mental health and depression. But the best thing about this book is that it's not really a sad book, though it's a book about melancholia. It's got this amazing energy that runs through sentences and passages like I just read out, through Burton's prose. There's a great bit where he's talking about sorrow, where he says, "No sooner are their eyes open, but after terrible and troublesome dreams, their heavy hearts begin to sigh. They are still fretting, chafing, sighing, grieving, complaining, finding faults, repining, grudging, weeping, vexing themselves, disquieted in mind, with restless, unquiet thoughts, discontent either for their own or other men's public affairs, such as concern them not, things past, present, or to come, the remembrance of some disgrace, loss, injury, abuses, etc., troubles them now, being idle afresh, as if it were new done. They are afflicted otherwise for some danger, loss, want, shame, misery that will certainly come, as they suspect and mistrust." But for something a bit more hopeful, I was rereading this week bits of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, where he says something more hopeful, but still terribly profound. He says, "Good and evil both increase at compound interest. That is why the little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The smallest good act today is the capture of a strategic point from which, a few months later, you may be able to go on to victories you never dreamed of." Spy in the chat says, "Do you think physical books are becoming obsolete? How important is it that we preserve this media?" Not at all. I don't think physical books are becoming obsolete. I do think that there will come a time when this video is obsolete. It will be either gone, deleted, erased forever, or it will be unreadable, undecipherable. It might be a file in the cloud somewhere, but there'll be no way for somebody to interpret that file. But compare that to what you see behind me. One of the books I pulled out earlier is this book. It's an edition of Procopius from 1654. It's whatever that makes it, 370 years old. It's bound in sturdy vellum. It's seen 4 of the last centuries, and this will outlive this video and me and you and our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It will outlive YouTube, whatever YouTube goes on to be or becomes. And the only way this can be destroyed is not just the consequence of the march of progress, it's wanton destruction. This is a thick, sturdy object. It's bound in vellum. It's printed on this lovely, thick paper. And this can sit on a shelf for the next 500 years. And if it avoids, fire and flood, then there's no reason why someone centuries from now will take this down and look at it, whatever's happening in the world around them. Eric Palaniuk says, "Do you think listening to books on Audible is just as good as reading a physical book?" I love Audible. I spend a lot of time in the car driving in search of books. And so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. But I don't think you can say that it's the same as reading. It's certainly not the same as reading a physical book. I mean, after all, I've been saying in this video how, books are objects. They're not just texts. They're certainly not just the sound of someone reading that text. So the other week I downloaded Adam Smythe's new book. He's a book historian and professor of English at Oxford. And it's called The Bookmakers. And you may have seen in one of my videos, I was listening to this on a drive down to Devon. But the thing with non-fiction, I find in particular, is that having listened to the audiobook, I went back and read it in print as well, because you take so much more in. And also it's got, user benefits that you don't get in audiobook. Audiobook's great for consuming something when you're doing something else, when you're driving or hoovering or walking the dog or doing something where you can't actually physically read a book. But, you know, if I open this up and I look at it, I can look at the illustrations he's referring to. I can go back a couple of pages to reference something that's now coming up here. I can reread a sentence. I can even underline things and scribble in the margins. All those things I mentioned earlier that make collectible books more than just the text they hold also apply to books that you and I read every single day. We've got a couple personal questions to finish. Ryan SPK says, how do you find balance between running your own bookshop and being a family man? How do you make sure you switch off at times? It's very generous of you to assume that I do find balance, but the truth is I don't. I find it really, really hard. I touched on it earlier when I spoke about, you know, loving what you do and doing something that you would do as a hobby, as a job. You know, it can make it all encompassing, and add that to running your own business and trying to look after a young family. It's incredibly hard, and I honestly don't have balance and don't find balance, and I hope I can get to the stage where I can. I've got a few things in my favour. My book room, as you can see behind me, where I have all my stock and I work every day, is in my house. So I'm around to, you know, change nappies and look after the wee one and help my wife out if needs be. But not enough, certainly not enough. And it does take its toll. And, you know, hopefully we can keep moving and growing and get used to it and find a way of making it work. But, you know, it's difficult. Eamon Adark says, off-topic question, I always see you wearing only one watch for almost all of your videos. Is there a special memory tied with your watch, or you just like that particular piece? So this is the watch that I wear in most of my content. You see, the watch I wear every day. I only own 2 watches. I'll show you the other one. Whichever one I'm not wearing sits on my desk, held by this rather handsome little fellow. And I'll show you this one first, because they both mean a lot to me. This is a sort of dress watch by Longines. I got this for, I think, my 21st birthday, and I absolutely love it. It's a Grand Classique, and it's got these beautiful kind of scalloping across the dial, those beautiful, fine, lovely and I absolutely love that. It's not really an everyday watch, but very, very special to me. And then the watch that you'll see me wearing every day, that you see in all my videos, I was also given by my parents. This they gave me on the morning of my wedding, so incredibly important and special to me. And it's a rather lovely Frédéric Constant chronograph. So they're the 2 watches. I do have a sort of, you know, a dream watch, a watch I would love to own, which is Edmund Hillary, when he summited Everest with Tenzing Norgay and co. Had a Smith's Deluxe watch made in 1953 on his wrist when he summited the mountain. That the watch that he actually used and owned for the summit he gave to the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers. So I can't own that one, but something like it from that year would be a pretty cool watch to own. I think it looks so stunning. Hawk FU says, I can't tell if you're 15 or 50. Please explain. I was actually taken aback. So many people asked under the post that I did about this video, asked how old I was, and I wasn't going to answer it, but since so many of you did ask, I feel like I should. I can't tell if you're 15 or 50. I get that a lot. There's a Reddit thread you might know called 13 or 30, and my videos have appeared on there before. Extending it to 50 is somewhat insulting, but I'll live with it. I turned 30 towards the end of last year, so I hope that satisfies all of your curiosity about my age. And the last question is Bills Belinsky 9239. Can we see more of Rufus? Yes, you can. He's right here, aren't you, buddy? And now he's off to sniff some books. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you so much for 100k. I really can't believe we hit that milestone, but onwards we'll keep making videos and keep sharing the wonderful, if arcane and bizarre world of rare books with you.